Thank you, Leinen. I'd like to focus a little bit today in my 10 minutes on some of the specific actions that can be taken to build us towards this green economy and to work for RIO+20. I'd also like to take Leinen up on his introductory remarks that we could make some demands on what the Commission might be and what the Commission and the European Union might be willing to do in RIO+20. I'll do that in quite a gentle fashion. But I think if we sort of look at this issue firstly of the green economy and we start analysing it, it appears to be very problematic to deliver. We have to define a precise endpoint. We have to look at national circumstances and cultures. There are huge estimates around of some of the required investments that are required incrementally in various systems. There might be a need for new international agreements. We might need to define exactly what this green economy is. There are clearly a lot of challenges there. But we would make, from our Policy Research Institute perspective, the first point we would make is that the alternative to a green economy is business as usual. Business as usual is a choice. Business as usual is a choice that comes with costs, and that those costs are effectively unsustainable. So we are making a choice by sticking with business as usual. Let's move somewhere else. I was fortunate enough to be the lead author on one of the chapters of the Green Economy report from UNEP, which was published earlier this year, and we looked at something called enabling conditions. I think Mr. Falkenberg explained these very, very well. What we need in the economy is the incentives to be in place such that actors will take account of natural capital concerns, of green economy concerns in their day-to-day investment decisions. That's, to our mind, the key way of moving towards this green economy. And we describe those as enabling conditions. Within that Green Economy report, enabling conditions chapter, we, as ISD, International Institute for Sustainable Development, have highlighted a few key priority enabling conditions that we believe can be put in place generically by governments across the world in their own interests, in the relatively short term, and without the need for complex or difficult international agreements. The idea here is to push some actions here that are already in countries' own interests. Some of those are pretty obvious, and the need for strengthened international governance will be the second half of today's session here. We also need a well-designed regulatory framework. We need that to be effectively enforced with legislation, and governments should continue to move their taxation systems towards more green taxation systems. We've seen from experience that that process is happening. It is happening relatively slowly. It's quite a difficult thing to do. And the way forward on that appears to be follow the leaders, many of those being already in Northern Europe, and in effect copy and learn from what they've done and apply it to more and more countries, and slowly the whole green taxation system will move forward. But today I wanted to look at two key areas where firstly governments can stop investing in areas that are counterproductive to the green economy, and secondly where they can increase their investment in moving towards the green economy in a productive way. These two areas are subsidy reform, we've heard a lot about this, moving prices such that it reflects the full cost of production, and the second area, more positively, is sustainable public procurement. The ability that governments have to use their buying power and their influence on markets to make their economies more sustainable. My organisation runs something called the Global Subsidies Initiative. We've been supporting subsidy reform and subsidy reformers since 2005. And for the last 3 years, we've been looking at fossil fuel subsidies. And the figures here are pretty dramatic. Global fossil fuel subsidies are around 1% of world GDP, several $100 billion per year. Removing just those ones that apply to consumers would reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 5 to 10% worldwide. And there are many, many other side benefits we'll get from subsidy reform, strengthening the incentives to move to clean energy technology, reducing local air pollution, energy security of supply, and so on and so forth. But what is really striking about the subsidy debate is how prevalent these subsidies are, but also how little we know about them. And if we look even at developed countries, and we look at the submissions that they made towards the G20, who have an initiative to reform ineffective and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, there's very, very little that developed countries are owning up to or saying that they have in terms of subsidies within their own economies. When we make closer examinations, these claims are not borne out at all. And without putting forward the European Union in any way as a bad example here. If we look at the European Union and we look at energy subsidies, obviously there's the ongoing coal subsidies going on, but we can also point to diesel taxation exemptions to fishery and agriculture in many countries. Is that really in the interest of the green economy? And then there's the big issue, perhaps, of oil and gas production. It's a contentious area, but the current logic on oil and gas production is effectively what we're doing as policymakers is erring on the side of encouraging more exploration and production. When people look at the fiscal treatment of the oil and gas sector, some will say this is very, very heavily subsidised. Other people will say these are necessary incentives that we need to build up this industry to guarantee energy security supply, jobs, whatever it may be. The decision that is taken in most countries at the moment is to err on the side of increasing production and increasing exploration activity. And I ask the question, is that really what we want to do, or is that going to just help us lock us into a future which is more dependent on the fossil fuel economy than now? A second issue then on to, subsidy reform would correct some of the counterproductive actions that are going on at the moment. But if we look at sustainable public procurement, this is a more positive step that governments can take. Governments typically around the world spend 15 to 40% of the country's resources, and they dominate certain markets for goods and services. Within this, obviously, they can then therefore effectively set new product standards within those markets and cause a lot of, give a lot of influence to those markets and to the standard making going forward. The EU is one of the leaders in sustainable public procurement, but there's also a secondary focus, I think, in this area where we have the so-called public-private partnerships, where governments put in some of the investment for new infrastructure schemes or for new investments in the economy. When we look at those P3 public-private partnerships and we look at the environment and social performance criteria that are contained within them, we find very, very little. This seems to be an ideal opportunity for governments to be able to do more using their own influence, and they're not taking it at the moment. Those are two, subsidy reform, P3, two of the very positive areas that the EU and other parts of the world could use to green their economies. I'd also like to just to consider today a more complex area, but one that could be a barrier to general progress or an opportunity, and that is energy-intensive industries. This might seem a little bit out of place when we're talking about a green economy discussion, but if you look at the websites at the moment of organisations such as the World Steel Association, the International Aluminium Institute, you will see them, what they are doing is they're highlighting the role that their products can play as part of a low-carbon economy. Wind turbines are an obvious example here, as are lighter vehicles, components of more controllable electricity grids that everybody wants, various parts of energy-efficient buildings, and the turbines that we need that can withstand higher temperatures and therefore be more efficient in the production of electricity. So what we have here, we've got sectors here that whose production is energy and carbon intensive, but whose products may be very, very beneficial to the economy, may be part of a low-carbon economy. And these industry associations are asking at the moment that there should be a more life cycle approach to policy making, assessing where emission reduction should best be incentivised across the value chain or the life cycle approach. And this idea is quite a new one, and it needs, we think, further investigation by policymakers. In effect, the question is the economy best set up such that it enables the best set of solutions to be made across these industries? I hope to have shown today very, very quickly that we need enabling conditions, the sort of investment conditions, the conditions that make investment in green ideas more attractive than others, as an essential bridge to our green economy. I also would contend that we need the leadership of the European Union as a credible champion, able to act above the sort of more basic mercantilist arguments. I'm based in Geneva, and a lot of our work is done with the WTO, and some of those debates are not particularly positive. My organisation, International Institute for Sustainable Development, we recommend that in the short term, the government should focus on a few high-impact initiatives and take these forward towards RIO+20 and to clear away some of the key barriers. Some concluding ideas. Firstly, why not at RIO+20 couldn't we see countries pledge to remove all energy subsidies unless they can show that these are actually positive for their sustainable development, and as a secondary pledge to help other countries reform theirs. Similarly, sustainable public procurement, public-private partnerships are an ideal opportunity for governments to mould expenditure, to mould standards, to mould practices. Let us again see some RIO+20 agreements, ideally with quantitative targets. We have a concern that the clean energy debate is in danger of being taken over by market share discussions, and we can point to the WTO disputes at the moment between Japan and Ontario and US and China. We need more renewables in a green economy, and if local content provisions are the price that needs to be paid for those in order to gain political acceptance, is there some sort of need for an international agreement on a gentleman's basis, or more formally, such that we can get past the WTO's constraints here and all move towards more renewables? We would like to see very much the debate on energy-intensive industries to be worked through. We see that as a barrier to progress. And in effect here, how can national, regional, international collaboration be employed to support the essential development of the breakthrough technologies and CCS we need? Are policies and measures optimised across the whole life cycle? And where could an international forum to discuss competitiveness and deal with it best be set up? And then finally, from Policy Research Institute, also known as think tank perspective, the EU can lead if we are truly convinced that greening the economy is the way forward, ISD is, then let us have the courage of our convictions. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.